Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast. It's awesome to be on here, and super cool to be on a podcast that my brother's appeared on. I think pick up my sister-in-law, and you've got all of this generation of this family. So
Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely reach out. I'm very interested because I feel that from your brother's perspective, I feel the theoretical part of entrepreneurship, but now it feels like you're the practical side of it. Now that I get a sense of what you're doing, and I would love to dive deep into your trajectory as an entrepreneur and how did you end up having this, this right now your background is just a virtual background, but someday you may be doing a Zoom interview from the moon. So talk to me about that.
yeah, hopefully, I don't think so far the plan doesn't involve sending me up there. I'm not sure. I'm in good enough shape to head up there anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting trajectory. I think similar to how we were talking before the call. Like I think the entrepreneurship is in my blood in many in many senses. Like I've had a number of different jobs. My whole career really was in commercial real estate development, real estate private equity, distress investing, stuff like that. I always found myself within organizations, I think, pushing up on power structures, right? That I think often in the corporate world, like people just want you to come in and do the task assigned to you. And, in many ways, I think excelling in the corporate world involves never really questioning why or how. And I really look at like the only jobs that I really loved. And I think they were ones that allowed me to question, how or why. Like my first boss in real estate, a guy named Bill Pringle, who used to be the president of Brookfield. He, on the first day, he said, "Look, tell me anytime you think I'm wrong and you think you have a better idea. Just be prepared that I'm going to come at you full speed. So be prepared to defend yourself." And I think those are good environments, but they're rare in the corporate world. And so I found myself going through a series of jobs where I always had ideas about, different ways to approach things and felt very constrained by the limits of the corporate world. So, I ended up starting about 5 years ago, the first cannabis real estate investment company in Canada. I'd been living in the States for a while and then moved home. Was working at a junior real estate investment bank in Toronto called Murray & Co. And started to get all these cannabis companies that, around the time that Canada started to legalize cannabis, and they were coming in looking for financing. And it was just something that nobody wanted to deal with, and from a corporate perspective, it's like, oh, well, we don't really want to take the time to figure this out. And I'm just like, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, well, if nobody's taking the time to figure this out, then, that's just what I'll do. I'll go out and, de-risk this market, and realizing that you make returns, outsized returns going into a market while it's early and there is a high level of risk and, is therefore kind of further up on the risk spectrum. And so that was kind of like my first foray entrepreneurship. I started Sensi Properties, which was the first cannabis real estate investment company in Canada, focused on sale leasebacks and other types of financing, and then, got involved in investing in a bunch of cannabis businesses, and as was an early player in that industry, which is still at its early stages of maturation. But yeah, that's kind of how I got involved. But I guess it was this natural process where I was never really good at taking orders and not questioning them, and always had too many ideas of my own.
Wow, that's amazing. And as you say, the main question when one gets into a job place and begins his or her career is, will I be able to unfold comfortably here? And one of those aspects has to definitely do with the ability to question the route. And now that you were able to finally get out of the corporate sphere, you realize that you want to be, or you want to send others to the stratosphere, to the moon. So tell me, how in the world are you coming up with a plan of, going to the moon? What is this about? I would love to dive deep into your vision of sending Canadians, maybe only Canadians, maybe not, to the moon.
Yeah, well, right now, we're certainly not planning on sending people. I think we want to enable people to go to the moon, enable the technology to allow that to happen. So, I can't say I did this on my own. I have a partner, a co-founder in the business, Dieter McPherson, and he's a lifelong space nerd, has been thinking about this stuff for a very long time. He's a super geek, as he likes to say. And, we started talking during the pandemic, kind of beginning of the pandemic, about some interesting investing ideas that got us looking at helium and helium-3, which many people have. He had realized there was a shortage on Earth relative to the future fusion reactors, and so we started joking about like where we could get helium-3. And it turns out there was a bunch on the moon. But then we started looking at the moon seriously in terms of mining, and there was no market for helium-3 in the near future. That's something that's much further out. But there was an immediate need from NASA and others in the international community. There was this whole return to the moon that's going on over the next couple of years that people are just not talking about enough, and people are not really paying attention to in the same way that Apollo was able to catalyze, and the space race was able to catalyze so much attention. People are not paying attention to it, but NASA and the international community is putting a new space station around lunar orbit in 2025. That's called Gateway. It's going to be like a new ISS. It's going to go around the moon. Astronauts will live there. They'll run experiments down on the surface. That's already being built, right? Wow. And that will be up there in 2025. China and Russia announced their own plans to build a moon base in 2025, or a space station. They haven't quite made that clear. In parallel with that, and then NASA wants to have settlement of the moon by 2030. So you're talking 8.5 years from now, settlement of the moon by humans. And so, that's a very tight timeline. And we realize there's this need really for a new supply chain. So right now with human technology, where we are as a civilization, we get to low Earth orbit, or LEO, where the space station is, et cetera, around 400 kilometers. And we run out of fuel. So we burn 90 to 98% of the fuel getting out there. Wow. In order to refuel in space, you need to fly up more fuel from Earth. And that's just extremely inefficient because you burn all the fuel getting up there. And so in order to scale as a civilization and become interplanetary, right, to go off to Mars, to go back to the moon, to explore the solar system, we are going to need to figure out how to make a new supply chain that exists outside of Earth's gravity, outside of the limits of Earth's gravity. And so the moon is really the place to do that. There is most rocket fuel by weight, in terms of ratio, is actually oxygen. So there's a ton of oxygen in the lunar soil, the dust that's behind me in this picture. That dust is 40 to 45% oxygen by weight. Wow. So you can process out the oxygen out of that. Then you've created, oxygen and air for life support for humans in space. You've also created most of the weight of the fuel. There's also happens to be a bunch of water ice on the moon in the permanently shadowed craters of the North and South Pole. That gets you hydrogen, right, as well as oxygen. And that's a rocket fuel, essentially, as well as water for humans to survive in space. And so all these things are really kind of the base layer of us becoming interplanetary, of us developing outer space and being able to, have space stations, space hotels, humans living and working in space. That whole dream that people have been thinking about, for really hundreds of years. But, especially since kind of the 60s and the space race came around, that's really realized by, what's called in situ resource utilization, or making oxygen and other supplies on the moon.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't know that those time frames are mind-boggling. I thought,
It's mind-boggling, yeah. Like, I wasn't paying attention to this previously, right? And I think as you start to pay attention and you start to look at all the news that's out there on the daily, there's new stuff about this happening every day, and there's countries all over the world working on various parts of it. It's a really exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, of course. And I genuinely thought that maybe if I'm, older, being very, very old, like an old person, I would be seeing just the cusp of it, right? But it seems that technology has exponentialized and our abilities to think forward are becoming less and less limited. As you put forth, maybe the pandemic in and of itself allowed a space for us creatives to think outside of the box. And for you, of course, it did it with your company, Canadian Space Mining Corporation. It's very interesting to see all of the science behind it. And you touched briefly on the politics, China being a player, the US being a player, Russia being a player. And there's this Moon Treaty that there's only like 19 countries signing them, meaning that they're trying to sustain, or rather keep safe the moon, to put it very, very in simple terms. So do you think this gold rush, quote unquote, for the moon can create a new space race, tensions between nations? How do you see the collaboration going outside of the world of planet Earth unfolding?
Well, look, space has generally been an area where, civilization has come together in the name of science to collaborate. But there are tensions going on and have been, for a very long time. I mean, there's long histories of, secretive missions with the U.S. military and the Russian military. Look, the Russian military, blew up that satellite earlier this week, creating all that space junk, endangering the space station. But I think the moon, quite frankly, and the development of the moon, and settlement of it has the opportunity to continue to be an area of international collaboration, right? Yes, it could cause tensions, and there's lots of stuff that could cause tensions, but look around on Earth, there's no shortage of areas that can cause tensions. I think, the collaboration within the lunar environment can be an area which fosters interconnectedness among humans, a collaboration between nations on science, on technology, and on some of these kind of common problems.
Yeah, I like that perspective, and it can create like the blue marble effect, right? Watching back to the Earth and seeing that we're just one big marble.
On the Moon Treaty, I mean, that that's a document that's kind of like dead in the water, right? No major spacefaring country has really signed that, and so that's dead in the water. There's the Outer Space Treaty, which is the main binding kind of document around space. That never conceptualized private actors in space, right? So that was nation states. And so a lot has changed since then, right? It's clear that the, Elon Musks of the world are really leading here. It's no longer just governments, right? And so we now have to think through frameworks of like, how do we deal with private companies operating in space, ostensibly on their own, maybe under the supervision of governments, but where governments themselves are no longer kind of driving the missions and the objectives. There's the Artemis Accords that were signed last year, so October of 2020, and those were for commercial use of extraterrestrial resources, and that's really been snowballing. So that's been the main kind of new document that's been building consensus around the world about what to do vis-a-vis, the moon, Mars, asteroids, etc. But a lot needs to be figured out. Given the timelines of people returning back to the moon, though, I think it's likely to be figured out in some capacity over the next 5 to 10 years. Hard to say exactly what that will look like from, treaty or geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly it. My next question was, how are private entities priced in the equation of space exploration? Because now we're seeing private entities just running the show more than nations, and it'll be just a very interesting manner. Maybe what if Amazon, or well, not anymore, but what if SpaceX declares independence in the moon? What would happen then? What would happen if you share territory with Elon Musk in the moon? How would that unfold? You know?
Yeah, I'd say that's beyond me. I'm not sure. But there's a lot of interesting questions, right? Like this, like you're asking. We enter into a lot of these different scenarios. You have, very soon, and I don't know at what point it is. Space for space transactions, which are happening where you have two parties transacting goods in outer space that are completely decoupled from Earth, right? And from there, it's like not only are we decoupled from government, we're like completely decoupled from Earth, right? Like if we're selling oxygen, liquid oxygen to some other party in space that's been manufactured in space, none of that has come from Earth in any capacity. Yeah. So you're entering into all sorts of like philosophical, social, political, economic scenarios, which, a lot of smart people in the world have probably been thinking through for a long time. And a lot more work is going to need to be done, over the next kind of decades. But it's, I think we're at a point where the thinking has been theoretical for a long time. And these things are really coming to a head over the next, I'd say 15 years, right? I think Musk's talking about doing a Mars mission in 2024. So, this stuff is coming up very quickly. And you could have someone declaring that they're their own nation out there. Does that fit within UN laws? And do the UN laws even matter at that point if they are their own nation in their own country? Like, at what point are the UN laws relevant? Yeah. If they don't consider them relevant, are they still relevant? They're probably still relevant to the people on Earth. But it's super fascinating.
It is. It genuinely is, and it'll be very interesting to see maybe policy being written by Star Trek fans. Trying to organize a civilization from outer space through really our vision of what could really be through our movies, through our series, through our books. It'll be just mind-boggling.
Well, I think when you meet with and you talk to the people who are in these space agencies and these space companies at a very senior level, like these are Star Trek fans, right?
Yeah.
These are people who grew up thinking about this optimistic side of space and what it can be for the shared benefit of humanity, as well as all the things we can do in space to advance technologies for the benefit of Earth. And so there is this great kind of optimism and romanticism that's out there within, what you would think is these rigid government bodies. They're made up of people, and obviously, the government bureaucracy and framework limits that to some extent. But I think a lot of these people have, grown up loving space, living it, and having these dreams. And now you're starting to see a point where the technologies come around to where that is being realized right now.
Yeah. And allow me for a moment just to play devil's advocate for both of us, for both for you and for me, because I'm a huge romanticist as well in this area. But I've been thinking, since we agreed on this interview, I've been thinking on our relationship to resources here on Earth, to the environment here on Earth. And what concerns me is that I feel that planet Earth hasn't really been, or isn't a finished project in a sense. We haven't conquered all of the problems that we're facing, such as a climate crisis, such as resource extraction or resource allocation, and relationships between people. So how can we ensure that our bad manners, our bad habits as a species don't extrapolate into outer space and the moon as a whole?
Yeah, I think there's several ways there, right? So, first off, I'd agree. We haven't really done a great job with the Earth. I think we're faced with some really major problems, climate change. Our just approach to our consumer economy is completely broken, right? People are so wasteful. They consume for no reason. A lot of that stuff needs to change, but that's probably beyond the scope of just this conversation. I think that's part of our fabric as a company is coming from that kind of viewpoint. Canada has really been and built a brand around the world as a responsible resource leader. Leading the world in responsible resource extraction and approaches from that perspective. We're not going to be the only party, active in the lunar environment. So we think that, and we have no control over what other countries do. We think Canada can play a really strong leadership position in establishing, the right ways to approach this in terms of responsible resource use. But it's going to, be upon the international community at a policy framework perspective to come about an agreement about how to approach this and thinking through those scenarios together. And then, fundamentally back to the problems of Earth, I would say that it's part of our core belief that the fundamental technologies that underpin in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, it's really living off the land and space, right? It's utilizing the resources where they are instead of bringing them there. And we think that those technologies like power generation, solar power, water processing, oxygen processing, et cetera, those are the battery storage technologies. Those are the same technologies that are key to our biggest challenges on Earth. And we think that they can be advanced in the lunar environment for use back on Earth and to benefit humanity back on Earth. And so that's a lot of what drives us is we, if you look at what we're really doing is processing oxygen at a razor sharp lunar dust, processing water out of laser sharp lunar dust. I think two of the biggest problems facing humanity over the next century are going to be clean air and clean water. And so we think those things are directly tied. Then you look at some of the other pieces of technology, and we think there's a lot of ties there as well to Earth's biggest problems. So,
wow, that's an interesting answer, and yeah, I agree that maybe this perspective really can, this project rather, can bring the best out of what we want to do, is to accomplish. But what are some of the principles you'd like to put forth once we're in space? What are some of the values your company believes in here on Earth, and also, going to the moon?
Yeah. So first value is, we value progress over potential. So it's about getting stuff done. It's not about a theoretical. This is not about kind of science experiments. This is about, commercializing technology, being very pragmatic in our approach. Solutions need not be overcomplicated if they don't have to be. It's about trust and transparency being key, in our actions, in our communications, in working with others. Another value of ours is it takes a village. This is not necessarily like something we're going to do on our own. That would be insane, right? This is about us working with, governments, academia, other companies around the world, not just in Canada, but around the world, finding alignment, working together to solve what is a civilization scale challenge. So those are some of the key values. We think, one is, move with speed and execution, really, because this is about, it's about moving fast. The timelines are very tight, as we kind of talked about from an international perspective. So it's about moving very quickly and then executing on the things you've laid out. And then it's about treading lightly, right? Like, treating the lunar environment in the best way possible, thinking through the possible impacts of how we're designing these operations in order to ensure that we are minimizing impacts. We want to process the lunar dust and process as much material out of it. So a lot of the mining on Earth right now is done. They, take 10% of the material, 5% of the material, and throw the rest out, And so I think as you can get to a process where we would like to use, as much as 100% of that regolith as possible, then that's about efficiency, right? And I think those efficiency tiebacks, if applied to mining on Earth, could make mining more efficient, use less material relative to what is produced.
What are some of the biggest trade-offs between going to space and going to the moon? The reward ratio for you?
Between going to space and going to the moon, or like
the biggest trade-offs that you see on your endeavor as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's about like a trade-offs. This is somewhere humanity needs to go. We are not going to explore the solar system if we don't figure this out. We're not going to get, to Mars or any of these things at scale if we can't figure this out. And quite frankly, we won't scale as an interplanetary species. So this is somewhere the world is going. I don't really see it necessarily as trade-offs. It's more of an inevitability. It's how it happens, and ensuring that it happens in the right way, I think is really the most important.
Switching gears a bit, this might be an obvious question, a silly one, but are you optimistic on our future as a species?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely am. I mean, certainly after like the last 18 months, 2 years, it's easy to be pessimistic with humanity's like inability to coordinate action, right? And fight amongst ourselves. But I fundamentally believe you really need to just move forward and build and do things that no problem is insurmountable. Like I think people get lost in this. Who am I? I am just one person. What can I do? But everyone can do something, and within the span of your life, you touch or indirectly touch the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, right? If you just think of all the small interactions on a daily basis. And so, I really believe that one person can change the world, and that one person is no one special. That one person is anyone. Mm-hmm. That anyone can have impact, and it's not necessarily the direct impact, but it's like, that impact you had on that person who had an impact on that person who had an impact on that person, almost like the butterfly effect. I really think that working together, we can solve these great problems of the world. And people really shouldn't be mired down in this kind of like hopelessness of who am I, what can I do, why do my actions matter? Everyone's actions matter, and let's just work together and solve these problems.
It'll require all of us to be willing to go to space and do it in a responsible manner, and just to put forth our best versions of ourselves, because it is a genuine concern that we haven't really matured as a species in a sense of being responsible. So it concerns me that we go out there, and as we've been talking on this conversation, there's no playbook, only that the playbook that we're creating, and who's going to follow that playbook? Hopefully, people like you and all of the people who are inspired by you and your project with a Canadian Space Mining Corporation becomes the best versions of themselves. Not only nations, but, we're seeing private entities being able to create their own visions of an interplanetary species.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's you just got to start somewhere. When I started the business, I had a friend who reached out to me and was like, look, why aren't you doing something for the climate instead? And it was like, look, we think there's a bunch of positive climate impacts, but I was like, look, if you think the climate is a problem, and I also believe that it's a problem, then, just start somewhere. Like, there's no reason that it can't be you. Like, she was asking me, and I was like, there's no reason it can't be you. Just start something. Start doing something about it. And that moves the needle. Like, and every incremental step we take in the right direction, collectively together, it is what it takes to move society, right?
Yeah. What is your vision with the Canadian Space Mining Corporation, not in terms of resources, but in terms of timeframes? Are you seeing your company flourish to the 2025 timeframe that you gave? Or you're seeing it work until 2030? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, like it's a weird industry to be in. I think like there's part of it that my partners and I, we talk about, in like where we are in 2025, where we are in 2030, where we think we are in 2035, 2040, so there's a mix of like kind of immediate thinking of our missions and objectives, vision of where we see the moon. The moon is this texting ground for Mars, right? It's clear that society and human civilization is going off to Mars. The moon is 3 days away. Mars is 3 months away, and that window only happens every couple of years as the planets align. And so, the moon is where we scale technology that will be applicable for the human settlement of Mars and exploration of Mars. And so we have to think in those timelines. I won't say that like the stuff, there's a marginally decreasing amount of certainty, as I think about 2040, it's very conceptual. When I'm thinking about 2025, it's like, very clearly laid out plans of exactly what the missions look like, what we're looking to do, et cetera. So
what would be the number one victory for you as a company within these 5 years?
Within the 5 years, I think, we'd like to be on the moon, having proved out a bunch of different technologies, such that we can scale them kind of by 2030. So, producing a gram of oxygen on the moon, processing water on the moon, and having solved some of the many large but problems along the way. I think that's where we'd like to be as a company.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and I'm rooting for you. I'm sure everyone who listens to this conversation will root for you as well. And as you say, Canada has always been the place to look at, in terms of being responsible. So yes, Daniel, this has been amazing. Is there anything else, that you want to add in terms of the company, in terms of your perspective?
No, look, we're leading a mission to the moon. But we can't do it alone. It's going to take a village, and so we need all the help we can get. We're looking for people that are sharp, that want to get involved, that want to come work with us. We're looking for partners that think they have technologies that are applicable to this, that want to partner with us. We're looking for investors. We need capital to pull this off. So, all the above, reach out to us through our, Twitter. I think Twitter, CSMC_SCMS. On Twitter, I'm at Dan Sachs on Twitter, or find me on LinkedIn. Reach out and talk. And we'd love, this is a big problem. It's a collective problem for humanity, and we think there's amazing applications to the technology that will be developed that can help life on Earth. And I think a lot of it is solving problems in space that'll be applicable to our biggest challenges on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And count on me just spreading the word as well. I think all of the information in the notes from this show, and sending emails and reaching out to people I know.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. It's been such a pleasure to be on here. I really appreciate you having me on here.
Likewise. And I'll looking forward to, hopefully less than 5 years from now, but do a round 2 in 5 years to tell me, hey, Alex, here's oxygen from the moon.
That'll be cool. Do it.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks.